I worked as a night guard at a Walmart in a small town in Canada. The store was massive, with endless aisles that were bustling and lively during the day, but at night, it transformed into a quiet, almost eerie place. For the first few days, everything was normal. The lights were on, the security cameras were active, and my job was simply to ensure no intruders entered the store. But starting from the sixth night, things began to change. Nights 1 to 5. Everything was completely normal. I would patrol the store, sometimes chat with my coworkers, and after midnight, when everyone left, I'd be alone. The background music playing from the speakers kept the store somewhat alive. Nothing unusual happened, just silence and calm. The sixth night. This was the night it all began. Around 2 a.m., I was patrolling the clothing section when I suddenly heard a noise coming from the toy aisle. It sounded like a creak, but louder and unnatural. I thought maybe a mouse or a small animal had gotten into the store. I went to check, but there was nothing. The cameras didn't show anything either. I felt a bit uneasy but tried to reassure myself that it might have been the sound of the ventilation system. The seventh night. This time, something even stranger happened. I was checking the grocery aisles when suddenly the lights in the electronics section went out. I headed over to see what was going on. When I got there, the lights turned back on, but what terrified me was that several TVs in the electronics section were on, all displaying a black and white image of a dark hallway. No sound was coming from the TVs, just that eerie image. I quickly turned off the lights and returned to my office, but I couldn't sleep until morning. The eighth night. This was the night my fear peaked. I was patrolling the gardening section when I suddenly heard loud laughter behind me. It sounded like a child's laugh, but at the same time, it was unnatural and terrifying. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. The cameras showed nothing either. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming from behind the shelves. I went to check, but again, there was nothing. When I returned to my office, I noticed that one of the chairs had been moved, as if someone had been sitting on it. The ninth night. This night, I decided to talk to one of my coworkers about the strange occurrences. He had also witnessed weird things on previous nights. We decided to patrol together. Around 3 a.m., we heard a noise coming from the clothing section. This time, we went to check it out together. When we got there, we saw that several mannequins had been moved, and one of them was standing in a strange position, its head turned toward us. We quickly left the area and returned to the office. From that night on, I never patrolled alone again. The 10th night. This was the last night I worked at that store. My coworker and I were patrolling when suddenly all the lights in the store went out. Only the dim emergency lights remained on. We heard footsteps rapidly approaching us. We started running toward the office, but no matter how fast we ran, the sounds kept getting closer. When we reached the office, we locked the door and checked the cameras. The footage showed something like a dark shadow moving through the store. That morning, I resigned and never went back to that Walmart. Even after leaving, I sometimes have strange dreams where I'm back in that store, and something unknown is approaching me. I don't know what was really in that store, but I'm sure it was more than just an ordinary Walmart. 2 in the morning, and the Walmart was eerily quiet. Only the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of my footsteps echoed through the empty aisles. I was Jake, the night guard of this massive store in the heart of San Francisco. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. Routine patrols, checking shelves, and occasionally chatting with the day shift crew. But gradually, a strange feeling began to creep up on me. Faint sounds like footsteps, shadows dancing in dark corners, And sometimes, a faint chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the stress of working the night shift. But with each passing night, these strange occurrences became more frequent. One night, in the home appliances aisle, I heard a sound like something dragging across the floor. I scanned the area with my flashlight but saw nothing. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out. From that night on, I always carried a baton and a large flashlight. Every sound made me jump. One night, in the toy section, I heard a loud laugh. It was a deep, hollow sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the store. I shone my flashlight around but saw nothing. Fear was consuming me. I felt like I wasn't alone in that store. An unseen presence was lurking in the darkness, watching me. One night, as I was walking towards the break room, I felt something grab my arm. I spun around in terror but saw nothing. With all my might, I pulled away and ran. I was losing my mind. Every night was worse than the last. I couldn't sleep. I was constantly on edge, listening for any sound. One night, as I was patrolling the aisles, a tall, thin figure with large, white eyes appeared in front of me. It let out a blood-curdling scream and lunged at me. I fought back as hard as I could, but it was too strong. It knocked me to the ground and began to beat me. I was losing consciousness when I heard the sound of police sirens. The creature shrieked and vanished into the darkness. The police found me in the stockroom, barely alive. I was rushed to the hospital and spent weeks in a coma. When I finally woke up, I was a changed man. I was haunted by nightmares and plagued by anxiety. I could never go back to that Walmart. I could never work the night shift again. I, who was once a simple security guard, had faced something that had shattered my sense of reality. If you ask me what happened that night, I can't tell you for sure. Maybe it was a hallucination, or maybe it was something more. But one thing I know for certain is that I will never forget that night. I've been working as a night guard at a Walmart in the heart of New York City for about 6 months now. During the day, the store is packed with people, but after midnight, it becomes a ghost town. The fluorescent lights buzz softly, the aisles stretch endlessly, and the silence is almost suffocating. Most nights are uneventful, just me, my coffee, and the occasional sound of a rat scurrying in the stockroom. But one night, everything changed. It was around 2 a.m., and I'll never forget what happened. The first incident. It started on a quiet Tuesday night. I was doing my usual rounds, checking the electronics section, when I heard a faint whisper coming from aisle 13, the toy aisle. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I mean, who would be in the store at 2 a.m.? But the whisper grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like a child giggling. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound. When I got there, the aisle was empty, but one of the toy dolls, a creepy one with lifelike eyes, was lying on the floor, its head turned toward me. I picked it up and put it back on the shelf, trying to shake off the unease. But as I walked away, I heard the doll say, "Don't leave me." I froze. The voice was clear, and it wasn't coming from the doll. It was coming from behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing there. The second night. The next night, I was on edge. I kept my flashlight close and avoided aisle 13 altogether. Around 2 a.m., I was sitting in the security office, watching the cameras, when I noticed something strange. The footage from aisle 13 showed the same doll I'd picked up the night before. It was moving. Not just falling off the shelf, it was crawling. I rewound the footage to make sure I wasn't seeing things, but there it was, clear as day. The doll was moving on its own. I called my supervisor, but by the time he arrived, the doll was back on the shelf, perfectly still. He laughed it off, saying I must have been tired. But I knew what I saw. The third night. By the third night, I was starting to dread my shift. I decided to bring a coworker with me during my rounds. We were in the grocery section when we heard a loud crash coming from the back of the store. We ran to check it out and found a pallet of canned goods knocked over, the cans scattered everywhere. As we were cleaning up, we heard footsteps echoing from the other side of the store. We followed the sound, but it always seemed to be just out of reach. Then, we heard it again, the whisper. This time, it was coming from multiple directions. My coworker looked at me, his face pale. "We need to get out of here," he said. But before we could move, the lights flickered, and for a split second, I saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the aisle. It was tall, too tall to be human, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. When the lights came back on, it was gone. The fourth night. I almost didn't show up for my shift that night, but I needed the money. I stayed in the security office as much as possible, watching the cameras. Around 2 a.m., the footage from aisle 13 caught my attention again. The doll was gone. I scanned the other cameras and found it, in the clothing section, sitting on a mannequin's lap. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my flashlight and radioed my coworker to meet me there. When we arrived, the doll was gone again, but the mannequin's head was tilted at an unnatural angle, its blank eyes staring directly at us. We searched the entire store but found nothing. As we were heading back to the office, we heard the whisper again, this time louder, more urgent. "You shouldn't have come back." The final night. That was the last night I worked at that Walmart. I was alone in the security office when the power went out. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the store. I grabbed my flashlight and radioed for help, but all I heard was static. Then, I saw it, the shadowy figure from before. It was standing at the end of the hallway, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I tried to run, but the doors were locked. The whisper turned into a deafening scream, and the last thing I remember is the sound of footsteps rushing toward me. When I woke up, I was outside the store, lying on the sidewalk. My supervisor found me and said I must have passed out from exhaustion. But I know what I saw. I quit the next day and never went back. Sometimes, when I walk past that Walmart at night, I swear I can still hear the whisper, calling me back.